And welcome into 1017 FM, 710 Keel. Welcome into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan, and let's welcome into the program now our life strategist. He is Eric Weiner. He is a best-selling author of The Geography of Bliss, and
which is now a mini-series.
Yeah, isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
Featuring Rainn Wilson, of all people. He's also written The Geography of Genius, as well as the critically acclaimed Man Seeks God, and also the Socrates Express. I'm going to have to read all of these.
They sound great.
Yeah, I'm gonna be doing some reading this summer. So Weiner is a former international correspondent for NPR, and his work has appeared in The Atlantic, National Geographic, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. And I could go on, but then we wouldn't have time for Eric Weiner. Mr. Weiner, welcome to Strategies.
Welcome.
Hi, you two. It's great to be with you.
It's good to be with you, Eric. So this all goes back to, is it Afghanistan and you're buying a rug?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how my Ben Franklin journey began. So I was, as you said, international correspondent for NPR, and that means going to some pretty dangerous places like Afghanistan during one of their many wars. I was taking a break from my reporting duty, dipped into a carpet shop, and found a carpet I wanted, and took out 10s and 20s dollar bills. That's what they wanted, U.S. currency.
Sure.
And the carpet dealer said, no, only Franklins. Only the Benjamin Franklin. And I'm thinking, I'm in a carpet shop in Kabul, and this guy knows Franklin. But, of course, he knew him as the face on the $100 bill.
Right.
Which is really how a lot of us know Ben Franklin, the face on the $100 bill.
Yeah.
But
wish I knew him better that way.
Did you know 70% of $100 bills circulate outside the U.S.? So there you go.
Wow.
There you go. Maybe that's why I need to find more of them.
There you go.
That's where they
So I tucked that away. This was a number of years ago. But it sort of like stayed in the back of my mind. And then a few years ago, big birthday was coming up, one that featured the number 6. I won't say what it was. And I thought I need, a guide to living and aging in this last chapter of my life. And normally, to be honest, I've turned to foreign voices of wisdom like Gandhi or Confucius. Mm-hmm. But I thought back to that carpet shop, and I thought, why not Ben? Why not Ben Franklin? And I started researching him, really digging in, reading not only his autobiography, but his 43 volumes of correspondence, and also traveling in his footsteps. He was a big traveler. And I, developed a relationship with him. I say encountered him.
Yeah. And
that's what this book is, Ben and Me. It is not a straightforward biography. It is my encounter with Benjamin Franklin and me teasing out the life lessons, both personally and socially, politically even, that we could all use from Ben's wisdom.
Yeah. Actually, I was, and you were impressed. We were both impressed, Eric, when we read, Lauren and I read you had kind of wanted to write a book on UFOs.
Well,
huh?
not he, but the publisher had wanted you to write UFOs,
well,
right?
That's part 2 of this story. Is we're in the middle of the pandemic. I can't travel very far, really, and I'm a travel writer primarily. So
right.
My editor and I are kind of brainstorming for book ideas, and he says, "Why don't you write a book on UFOs?" And first of all, when your editor/publisher suggests an idea, the correct answer is, "I'll look into that." So that's what I said was, "I'll look into that," and I did. I really did not want to write a book on UFOs,
right?
But I started nosing around, and then I came across this article in Salon.com of all places. I think the title was "Our Founding Fathers Alien Obsessed," and I'm like, "What?" And it turns out there were a few of them. John Winthrop, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and others who really believed that there is intelligent life in the universe, and one of them was Ben Franklin. And he talked about a chorus of worlds out there, as writing this as like a 23-year-old. And that's, once you get into a subject, it's just a rabbit hole. And I followed that rabbit hole. And that's the second piece of the puzzle of when I'm like, okay, the universe is telling me something. I'm going to write a book on this guy and write a different kind of book, not a 900-page academic biography, but something more personal and intimate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can even tell that from the front cover. I love the illustration of Ben winking. It's it's very approachable, and it that flows throughout the book. It is your true personal encounter with him.
Right. It's been said that Franklin is the founding father who winks at us, and
I love it.
He does. He's got this mischievous. I still talk about him in the present tense. I guess it's a good side. He has this mischievous side to him.
Yeah.
We can talk about this, his reputation for being a ladies' man, his practical jokes. There's a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or real or not, that, in 1776, the Second Continental Congress is sitting down, they're casting about, they need someone to draft the Declaration of Independence, right?
Right.
And someone said, why not Ben Franklin? He was a very successful businessman and scientist by then. He was a printer and publisher and writer. And the story goes that they nixed the idea because they were afraid Franklin would insert a joke into the document.
I love it.
Again, I don't know if it's true, but it certainly sounds like the kind of thing he would do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the more you looked into this, you were kind of wanting to you wanted to know more about living and aging and doing that in a healthy way, kind of a long, healthy life, if you would. Did it surprise you that Ben showed? We say a lot on this program, there are no coincidences.
Yeah,
I don't believe in coincidences.
And it sounds like on every turn, Ben appeared in your life.
Yeah, he did start to pop up everywhere. And you wonder if, there's that old expression, to a man with a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail.
Yeah.
But you do start to see things. And so let's talk about health and healthy living in Ben, because I have to admit, to most listeners, it might seem like kind of an odd juxtaposition, because you look at those portraits of Ben Franklin, and he's balding, not fully bald. He's got like strands of long hair. He's got, big jowls like a bulldog and a big old pot belly.
Yep.
And the thing is, first of all, you're looking at older, successful Ben. No one took a portrait of you back then when you were young and nobody. And when Ben was young and a nobody, and that's how he was for many years, he was fit. He was buff. He lifted weights, and he swam. He was a big swimmer. And this is back in a time where most people did not, even sailors did not know how to swim. And Franklin was an expert swimmer, and he is the only founding father inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale.
I did not know that. Wow.
There you go. And he actually continued to swim and exercise throughout his life. He swam naked, as most people did back then.
Right.
And he never smoked. He thought tobacco was unhealthy. This is the 18th century, and he predicted in 100 years it would be banned, or it would be, not popular. He was right idea, just off by 100 years. And he did, especially as he got older and more successful, he did like the wine, Madeira wine in particular. He liked food. But he lived to 84 years old. He lived to 84.
Wow.
David, 84 years old.
That was a long life for then. Yeah. Wow.
It's a pretty long life for us, It was a longer life for them. And so he was clearly doing something right. I sort of attribute it to his mental outlook as much as anything else.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me, Eric, that, you're talking, and maybe it's because where I am, I'm 67 years old.
Okay, you're north of me.
Okay, so here was Franklin, and he's in the closing act of his life, a time when he could have been golfing in Florida, right?
The equivalent.
Yeah, the equivalent of
the equivalent of golfing in Florida. And
but it was during that third. It was during that last third of his life that he accomplished the most that we all of us remember him for.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ben that we know as the sort of the founding father really was from age 69 onward. So he's I'll tell you the story. The Pennsylvania Assembly sends him off to London to try to negotiate with the British and on better terms, and Ben was all about getting along with people. He spent 15 years in London on that assignment, trying to keep the British Empire, that fine China vase, he called it, intact. He really didn't want to see a break, but it got to the point, and there was one incident in particular where he was sort of hauled before this a council called the Privy Council and publicly humiliated for an hour. And he walked out of there, and most historians agree that he walked into the room and a British loyalist and walked out a rebel. So age 69, to make a dramatic change like that, he had more to lose and less to gain than any of the other founders. Then he comes back to Philadelphia. He's sort of basically kicked out of England, and lands in Philadelphia, finds the U.S., the young U.S. and Britain at war, and he's involved in it all. He's editing the Declaration of Independence and signing it. He's taking a trip up to Canada in late winter and nearly dying to try to get the Canadians on our side. And then at age 70, they say, Ben, we need you to go to France and to get the French to help us in this war. And he goes, and that was the sort of
that was a turning point.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, that was not his final act. He had more final acts than the musical Cats, I like to say.
I love it.
He kept having more final acts. You think so? He's 70 years old. He goes to France, and he's I don't know if you've seen the the Apple TV series featuring Michael Douglas, but that focuses on this time period.
Right.
Roughly 1776 to 1784, when Franklin's basically the U.S. ambassador to France, trying to convince them to back us. And it was a tough job, but he pulled it off.
We got a lot to learn. We are learning a lot about Ben. Ben and Me is the brand new book. Eric Weiner, best-selling author, and he is our life strategist today. We're in search of a founder's formula for a long and useful life. Got much more to learn today with Eric Weiner here on Strategies for Living. Stay with us. And we're back. We're back here on Strategies for Living on 101.7 FM, 710 Keel. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan. Eric Weiner is our life strategist today. I can hardly hold this book because it's so hot.
On fire.
It is.
I don't think you should be holding it.
I probably shouldn't. Should maybe combust right here in front of me. Eric, what does that feel like, Eric, on the day? I mean, I know you've done this many times now. You've had lots of great best-selling books. But what does it feel? What's it feel like on the launch day, on the day that everything hits the bookstores, hits the booksellers?
Well, it's a high, I'll be honest.
Yeah. And
it's kind of strange because the book publishing industry has two speeds: very, very slow and very, very fast.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, it's strange. I spent 3 to 4 years working on this book, researching it, traveling, writing it, editing it, and then all of a sudden it comes down to one day, more than a day, but one launch day, in a pretty compressed period of time. And it's odd. It's a bit odd that you spend so long working on something, and then there's this one day where, it's sort of, I imagine, like what the NASA astronauts felt like. They trained for years and years for, say, Apollo 11, and then one day you're blasting off in the rocket. That's what it feels like.
So, what was the biggest surprise for you in all that research as you dug and you researched and you did your thing? You're probably like a lot of us. We think we know somebody from our what? How much history do we take? We get it in the what? Sixth grade, seventh grade, we get American history. We get it in high school. If we go to college,
Right.
most of us have to have at least, unless we're a history major, we have to have at least an elective course,
Sure.
in history. So we think we know, but
we think we know, but we don't know, and
yeah,
and I was, this was sort of my education in a way, and I can't choose one thing, but I would say I was surprised, as I said, that this line from, loyal British subject to rebel was not a straight line, and not all the founders traveled at the same speed.
yeah.
It was zigzag. Now we look back at it and we say, oh, of course, the U.S. was going to become independent, but it was not a foregone conclusion then, and Franklin proves that. That at age 69, all of a sudden he switches gears. So that curvy line to independence surprised me. Also, let's just talk about history for a second. Most of history, a lot of it these days, is seen as negative, something to avoid. Those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it, something to that effect. But what about the good parts of history? Those who forget the good parts of history are doomed not to acquire it, not to learn it. And so I think the challenge is to essentially cherry pick history. Cherry picking has kind of a negative connotation. You're cherry picking your argument. When it comes to history, I think we should cherry pick it. We should look back at a figure like Ben Franklin, 18th century, and say, well, he was not the best husband. He had his flaws, definitely.
Right.
But he did a lot of things right and had these attitudes that we can learn from. Yeah. And that was surprising. Also, just how much of a man in full he was, and not just sort of this cartoonish figure that we have of him in our mind of, Ben flying the kite, Ben flirting with the ladies of Paris, Ben signing the Declaration of Independence. He was much more than that, and he was. I couldn't say whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. I could point guys to one position he had that today we say, oh, that's liberal, and another position that would be conservative.
But is it fair to say, Eric, he is probably the most misunderstood of all the founders?
I think so, because he's sort of been placed in this, as I said, cartoonish box. He's cuddly and friendly, and that's about it.
And as we've said, we've got him on
got
him on $100 bill, and yet you point out that you discovered he was more Buddhist than banker, huh?
I've got a chapter in there called Buddha Ben. And he was many, many things. He was like, I'm not saying multiple personality disorder, I'm saying multifaceted. And he's on the $100 bill, so he becomes very much associated with raw capitalism. Anytime there's a story on the TV news about the economy, recession, jobs, you see the Franklins flying by. And, okay, he definitely was a businessman. He's very successful. He was a printer and a publisher. He published Poor Richard's Almanac. He made enough money that by age 42 he could retire. But then I'm reading that he thought taxation was a very good idea, an obligation. You can't be a member of the club if you don't pay your dues. And he also thought there should be a limit on the amount of private property that a person could own. That doesn't sound right. That sounds almost socialist. He also, so he invented, as you probably know, he invented lots of things over his life. You probably know about the lightning rod.
Yeah.
Right.
But he also invented a stove called the Franklin stove that was more efficient. He invented the flexible catheter, which I'm thinking it's just got to be a lot better than the non-flexible catheter.
Yeah.
Yeah. He invented the long arm, which allowed him to grab books at the top, like 30 feet up the top of his big bookshelf without climbing up there.
Love
And he
that.
invented a very odd musical instrument called the glass harmonica. Not harmonica, armonica, no H. It works on using glasses and bowls to make these different pitch sounds, and it's very ethereal. So he invents all these things, but does not apply for a single patent, and there were patents back then.
Right.
And his explanation for this was, well, I benefited from the inventions of others, so why shouldn't they benefit from mine? So that sounds very communal / socialist. I'm using modern terms to describe his thinking.
Right.
So big surprise is how he was much more fluid than we think of him.
Interesting. Now, we talk a lot on this program, strategies for living, right? We talk a lot about the big questions. And you kind of say in the book, how did we get here? Where do we go when we die? Those are variations of the questions that we toss around. And then what should we do in the meantime? First couple of questions there, Ben, what isn't much help on, right?
No, he was not like a metaphysical philosopher. He tried that briefly when he was 20 years old, and he's like, no, these are questions that can't be answered. He once said that all theological debates can be boiled down to this: it is so, it is not so. It is so, it is not so. That's a direct quote from him, and he's like, forget it. So he very much became interested in that question of what do we do to live a useful life. That was the animating question, the animating word for Franklin was usefulness. How can I be useful in these few decades I have on this planet? So he was very much a pragmatist that way.
So one of the things, and as we've mentioned, the intro is titled Alien Ben. We've already talked about why.
Right.
But I love all of the titles. I mean, we've got everything here from Resting Ben to Baby Ben to Bookish Ben to Grounded Ben to Wandering Ben.
Naked Ben.
Naked Ben. Oh yeah, there you go. Angry Ben. What made Ben angry?
Well, lots of things made him angry, but he rarely expressed that anger. And this runs counter to, I think, the conventional wisdom today. I think the conventional wisdom is if you're feeling angry, you should let it out. You should express it to the person who has angered you. And that was not Ben's approach. I'll give you an example. He would write what I call placebo letters. If he was mad at someone, he did get mad, he was human, he would write an angry letter, and he'd put it aside for 24 hours at least, and then revisit it in 24 hours and see if he still wanted to send it. And 9 times out of 10, he did not send it, or he revised it and softened it. He thought anger was toxic and destructive, and the expression of anger in that way. I'm sure he took it out going swimming or exercising or in other ways, but he tried very hard not to blow up at people. He made a point of using softer language. Again, different from our time where you watch cable TV news. It's hard language in your face. That was not Ben's way. He wanted to soften the language, keep the bridge open, keep the doors open.
Yeah. He was a busy guy, wasn't he?
He stayed busy his entire life. The one thing that Benjamin Franklin failed at, that he was an absolute failure at, was retiring. He tried when he was 42, so has a successful publishing business, and he's got enough money to retire. He says, I'm going to retire. So it's experimenting with electricity, very successful. And then he gets called into politics. So like, Ben, you should run for the Pennsylvania Assembly. Ben, you should go to London. Ben, you should go to Paris. Ben, you should join the Continental Congress. And he had this philosophy of public service. He said, never ask for a public service job, never refuse when you're offered it, and never resign it. That was his motto. And so he was busy, and I think it was one of the keys to his longevity and to his happiness is he was engaged and always learning and always doing. So, yeah, I mean, even late into his life, he was extremely busy, but not frantic. You know, it's one thing to be frantic running around. He was
steady.
He was in Paris.
He was a steady busy.
Yeah, and he knew when to rest. He liked his Madeira wine. He liked to play chess. He liked to go for a swim. But he never really retired from public life or active life up until the day he died.
Got to get a break in here. When we come back, I want to talk about and ask you about the Ben Franklin effect. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
We're with Eric Weiner. His brand new book, it's hot off the press, Ben and Me. You can find it wherever you buy books. It's in search of a founder's formula for a long and useful life. And we'll be back here on Strategies for Living in just a moment. And welcome back. Welcome back into 101.7 FM, 710 Keel. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan. Eric Weiner is our life strategist. Brand new book, Ben and Me, just out today. Hot off the press. It's in search of a founder's formula for a long and useful life. We're learning a lot about old Ben.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously, Strategies for Living, we got to talk, Eric, about the Ben Franklin effect. What is that?
So I'll tell you the story of how it came about. Franklin's young-ish, and he's the clerk to the Pennsylvania Assembly.
Right.
Fairly low job. And there's this gentleman of repute, a wealthy man, who doesn't like Ben, just doesn't take to him, and threatens to make life miserable for him. Okay, now when faced with this situation, what would most of us do? We might suck up to the guy, basically, offer to do him a favor, to shine his shoes or to do something for him. Ben takes the opposite approach. He says, I heard you have this really rare and wonderful book. I was wondering if I could borrow it for a few days or a week. And the man says, well, I do have the book, sure. Ben borrows it, returns it on time with a nice note, and they become fast friends. So the Ben Franklin effect is this notion that the way to endear yourself to someone is not to do favors for them, but to ask them to do a favor for you. And several studies by psychologists recently have confirmed this, that it is true that we like people not who do favors for us, but for whom we do favors. And it sounds counterintuitive, but if you think about it a bit, it kind of makes sense. We become more invested in that person, tied to them. Yeah. And if we don't like them at first, but we're doing a favor for them, we start to think, well, maybe I do like Joe because I'm doing a favor for him. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
That's the idea of, allowing someone to offer you a present and then receiving it. I mean, to me, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think Franklin recognized that we want to be useful.
Yep.
And when you give someone else the opportunity to be useful and helpful to you, they feel good. It's a good feeling.
It's funny because the way I learned it as a kid, I was in school, was, the easiest way is to ask somebody to borrow a pencil. So that was a quick and easy way to get that Ben Franklin effect in a classroom.
And that's an interesting question, is whether it works with small favors, borrowing a pencil or a book.
Yeah.
Does it work if I can borrow your beach house for a month? Or, so it's, I'm not sure it works at the higher end of the scale. It tends to work more, psychologists have found, for non-material things, actually, like asking for advice. Like, say a young aspiring radio journalist, comes to you guys and says, I want to get in the business. Can you help me? I think you'd probably say yes, and why would you do that? It's not a quid pro quo thing. They can't really do anything for you.
Right.
But it's that idea of being useful. And I don't know, we have very mixed feelings about that term useful, because I think most people would say, yeah, I want to be useful, but we also have this expression where, a friend might come up to you and say, oh, so-and-so, she's just using you. Like that's a bad thing. And if you think about it, why is it a bad thing? Why not be used? It's all we have is a few decades on this planet. Let's be useful. Let's be the candle that burns, down to the base. So, Ben was willing to be useful throughout his days.
Yeah.
And at the heart of that, I think, is what we all long for, which is connection. I think, perhaps.
Yes, and being useful means you're not useful for yourself. Like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I'm useful for me. I'm not sure what that means. That's just called selfishness, right? But usefulness implies another person, and that's the sort of distinction between happiness, which I've written a lot about, and usefulness. Like, you could, I suppose, have a personal happiness where you're just happy in your own house and you never leave. But you can't really have a personal usefulness, can you?
That's a good point.
Interesting point.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the biggest piece of wisdom that you feel like Eric Weiner learned from Ben Franklin, from your years, I guess, in your relationship with Ben?
I think, boy, that's a tough one. I think it's.
I take that as a compliment, Eric.
Yeah. Okay. Can you ask me an easier question, please, David? So I say in the book that I'm tempted to call Ben Franklin an optimist, but really he's what has been called a possibilian. Not my term. I wish it was my term. David Eagleman, a neuroscientist, came up with it, but I've latched onto it. A possibilian. In other words, he just believed that things were going to get better, and in the middle of all his troubles in London, where he's being raked over the coals by the British Parliament and the King, and he's viewed as an enemy, he writes to his sister Jane, and he says to this effect, all in all, I think it's a pretty good sort of a world. And that kind of glass is half empty view of the world, to me, is some of the greatest wisdom. I guess he called gratitude. So he's in his 80s, and he's writing. His sister Jane he had many sisters, but Jane was his quote unquote peculiar favorite, and they stayed in touch throughout Ben's life. And he is sick, and he says, basically, I've got, three things: the kidney stone, the gout, and old age, and only one of them is incurable. And he didn't dwell on what was wrong. He focused on what was right.
Yeah.
And I wish I could be more like that. I'm still struggling with it.
What do you want? What do you want us to take away? What do you really want the reader to take away from Ben and me?
That as we go ahead into artificial intelligence and self-driving cars and God knows what else, let's not forget the positive lessons, the wisdom from the past. That just because they didn't have Wi-Fi in the 18th century doesn't mean that we don't have something to learn from them. And we should be picky about who we learn from. But Ben Franklin's a good one. He's someone we have something to learn from. And so be open to the idea that the past is not just this sort of primitive, rough and tumble, phase that we've left behind, but that they knew things we don't know, even if they weren't as technologically advanced. And I can picture Ben Franklin in a coffee shop where are you guys, in Shreveport?
Shreveport.
Coffee shop in Shreveport with his MacBook Air and a pair of noise-canceling headphones and a double latte frappuccino, typing away. And I bet if you sat down with him, he would have a lot of wisdom to convey to you.
I agree with you 100%. Ben and Me, In Search of a Founder's Formula for a Long and Useful Life. Eric Weiner is the author, our life strategist today here on Strategies for Living. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Welcome back into 101.7 FM, 710 Keel. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Lauren Leon McMillan, David McMillan with Eric Weiner. The book is Ben and Me, In Search of a Founder's Formula for a Long and Useful Life. Eric, the only complaint that I have is that we need about a 4-hour program to cover everything that you've packed into Ben and Me. But I'm looking in there, and the producer's shaking his head. He's not going to give us any more time. So, I hope you'll come back. This is great stuff, my friend.
No, I've really enjoyed this. I mean, I really have, to be honest. And I think it's the kind of conversation that Ben would enjoy. Ben Franklin really enjoyed good, honest, freewheeling conversation. And he liked it like this, we're three people talking.
Yeah.
He was not a great public speaker. He didn't like getting up and talking to 100 people. But three people, where he liked two of them, he liked everyone he was talking to. That was his thing.
I like it.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for the book. Thank you for being a great life strategist here on Strategies for Living. I hope we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Be happy and be useful.
You bet. Folks, thank you for tuning into Strategies for Living. We appreciate you being here with us, and we appreciate our sponsors making it possible. The Robinson Film Center, and Azalea Cleaners, and Pintail Roofing, and Learning RX, and Hypris, Cannabis with Love, and the Shreveport Little Theater. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call to make, who is it that you'd call? And what is it that you'd say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For Eric Weiner, for Lauren Leon McMillan, I'm David McMillan. See you next time right here on Strategies for Living.